Okay.
Okay.
Ready? Yep. Let's be done by 3:30. I know. Call this meeting to order. It is 2:33 p.m. on Thursday, July 2014. This is the July meeting of the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee. So first order of business is to do roll call. Mr. DeSantis.
Here.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Ms. Stoney. Mr. Weaver. Here. Mr. Lindenwood. Ms. Howe. Ms. Witt. Here. Ms. Wilbur.
Here.
Ms. Walsh. Here. And I am here as well. We do have quorum. Can I mention the public comment?
Just kidding.
I know it.
All AMATS meetings are public meetings. The public is invited to comment on all of our business items. If we'll have a presentation by staff or a consultant. For the business items, the committee will then be given a chance to discuss the matter, and at that point, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Mr. Lindenwood. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are coming. Next up, we have a lot of minutes this time. So we'll go through one by one. So first in front of us is the April 11, 2013 meeting minutes.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Mr. Lindenwood as well. Are there any opposed to approving? Comments?
Well done, they look good, and it's good that we get cut.
All right. Hearing none, April 11th meeting minutes are approved. Next up is May 9th, 2013.
Move to approve.
Second.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved. Next up is June 13th, 2013.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved. And last but not least is actually May 8th, 2014.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved.
Jennifer said they're very well done.
We have
Appreciate that.
4 sets that the contractor is finishing up. And so.
And that's it?
And that's it for TAC minutes. We have 2 or 3 policy committee, I think.
Well, one that wasn't.
And the one that.
Two to be
yeah.
done, June from last year.
Okay, so we have one that's done, just needs to be approved, and then 2 more that are a little older that we're finishing up with, and then we're out of time. Great. It's almost over.
It's just beginning. No one's caught up. I know, I remember that. I forget that I was here last year. I was reading through it. Oh yeah, I've been here that long. All right, next we're moving on to our business items. Business item 5A is the AMATS Air Quality Advisory Committee bylaw revision.
Okay, so this is the air quality committee bylaws, and they added some language here in 2.5.3 on the second page. Talks about no committee member with an identified conflict of interest may sit as the E and D, so I should say interest, not interested. Interest may sit as a technical advisory committee, AAQAC rep. And I believe that language came up when they discussed this. Had some topics, some language at the policy, or not the planning and zoning, where they were deciding whether or not they would appoint John Spring as the air quality advisory, or as the P&Z rep to the Air Quality Advisory Committee, and wanting to make sure that when he was at Air Quality Advisory Committee, that if the concern was there would be conflicts, and then if he was to become the TAC rep, he would have a lot of opportunities to not be able to vote, and so that the language got added there to make sure that if someone had a clear conflict, they would.
Did that get put on?
It was policy committee.
Policy, okay, well, I know the language, there was some discussion of this at P&Z when he was saying, yeah, I'll be able to come over there, and then, so there's several different locations where that got, so they said, make some kind of language that hits that topic. That's the 2.5.3. Okay. On the first page, where it says the preamble, there's been talk a couple of different times about the roles of our advisory committees and whether they are supposed to offer recommendations to the TAC and the policy committee, directly to the policy committee, et cetera. And so the language that I added here is trying to take care of the idea that the Bike and Ped, the Freight Advisory Committee, the Air Quality Advisory Committee, when they're offering recommendations, they are to come through the TAC, so the TAC can adjudicate that before it gets to the policy committee. So that is what we tried to do here with the language there, to get the notion that the advisory committees don't offer advice directly to the policy committee. They offer their advice through the technical advisory committee. So if they say, we think you should add more money here, or put this project there, or whatever they're suggesting, it goes to the TAC first. So that's the idea behind that language. That's a crack at it. Happy to allow you folks to wordsmith it, but that was what we were trying to get at with that language there.
Mr. Moore?
So is that similar language in the bylaws of the other two?
It will be.
Okay. so
I
we're
wasn't going to
starting
bring all
with this
three of them to you before at one time before we kind of got it. There's no rush on this, so I
Okay, I just
figured
wondered.
we'll bring it to you first, and you could start with this one since the other change was already going to be in there. And then once we got it wordsmith, we can add it to the Bike and Ped and the Freight real quickly.
Any other questions?
Swit has such a look of consternation.
I don't think it's still quite clear. I mean, what you described, what you explained was clear. When I read it, I don't get that.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of how that might clarify.
Yeah, what I said, I couldn't quite get into the
Right,
words
so,
there. So
um,
I guess it's kind of a straw man I threw up to.
How about this? What, if I may, through the chair, perhaps, would this, if what I read here, would it match what your intent was? If it were to say, assist, advise, and submit recommendations to the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee with regard to air quality planning proposals and to transportation planning proposals. So, is that what you meant?
Well, I want to make sure that the idea is that the recommendation of any of these advisory committees, they're supposed to be recommending stuff to the policy committee, but it's supposed to go through the TAC. It's not supposed to go directly to the policy committee.
How about this? Assist, advise, and submit recommendations for review and comment, to the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee for review and comment prior to the policy committee with regard to air quality planning, something like that. So that we can review it and comment on it, but it's not, it's still their comments, it's still their.
And the idea is that the technical advisory committee can, like you're saying, review and comment on recommendations coming from the other committees. And you can either accept it, or it could go to policy committee as technical advisory committee does not, necessarily agree with this recommendation. That's sort of the intent that this is supposed to be.
Right, so maybe we say review and comment.
Is it too simplistic to say to the technical advisory committee for the policy committee?
I think it's correct, that's it. Makes sense to me, through the
Thank you,
committee. Goes through here, and we make our comments, and then it goes on. I really think it's okay, I don't think we need to overthink it. Thank you. Respectful.
So is the intent, if I may, the intent is that then the technical committee would either adjudicate, modify, but submit both sets of recommendations to the policy committee?
Well, whenever we take something to the policy committee, whether it's the TIP or the MTP, there's a comment response summary that says, here's what the suggestion was.
So that's the same thing.
2 million instead of 1 million.
Okay.
Here's what staff's suggestion is. Here, when the TAC looked at it, this is what they thought. When the Citizens Advisory Committee looked at it, here's what they thought. And when the Assembly looked at it, here's what they thought, or silent, or whatever. So that they'll see that and they'll know, staff and P and Z thought this was a good idea, but the TAC disagreed with it. And then the policy committee can make whatever decision they want, but that's kind of the idea, is that it all funnels through this body before it gets to the policy committee.
And if I just may, on the second, 2.5.3, the conflict of interest, not interested, you said that.
Yeah.
Oh, you already said that, sorry.
I-
Any other questions or comments?
And at this time, it's open to the public. Are there any questions or comments presented here in the public on this item? Hearing none, now we'll ask the committee. Move to approve? So, Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, you said it so quickly.
The seconding everything.
I'm just gonna second
I'll
everything.
second. Are there any opposed to the proposed changes as written with the ED removed and conflict of interest? Hearing none, we are so moved. Next before us is business item 5B, the 2015 to 2018 tip air quality conformity determination.
So this is our air quality conformity analysis for the 15 to 18 tip. And, basically, Mr. Morris can clarify this, but it basically, I believe basically says, we don't pollute too much, we're okay. We don't, not busting the budget, in layman's terms. And so what we're asking today is release this for 30-day public review. Our requirement for the 15 to 18 tip is to have it online by October 1 of this year. That's the start of the federal fiscal year. If we approve it in August, at the August policy committee meeting, then the feds will have basically 30 days to accept it, say it's okay, approve it, meets all the parameters, so that we still have a little wiggle room. So we don't need to sweat about not approving it this month, or something another month, we let it for 30 days. And then at the next TAC meeting, you'll recommend hopefully approval of both the conformity and the tip. Recommend that approval of the policy committee.
I just add just one thing. Greg, you said not busting the budget, there's no budget to bust anymore. We're first operating, this is the first time I think we've operated under the limited maintenance plan rules for this, and so there's no budget. The process for doing the conformity analysis is much simpler. It's essentially just demonstrating that you're still well into compliance with both the PM10 and the carbon monoxide standard. That's essentially what this does, and that you're still implementing the control measures that are in your SIP. So, essentially, we affirm that, go through the interagency consultation process like we always did, make sure that they agreed and develop the correct process, and they have done in this case. So this is the first time that we've had less work to do.
So you wanted to say all that, that's why I said it.
Yay, it's less work. Are there any other questions?
So Steve, because I didn't catch this earlier, do we want to have the pollutants names in here? Before, we've always done, zero air quality conformity or 10 air quality conformity, and this has both of them in there to make sure that people realize that there's both pollutants are addressed in this conformity determination.
I mean, I don't object, I mean, that's fine.
I'm just wondering if, just for clarity, people look at this overall, we don't help folks know that we're doing the conforming analysis for both, including PM10, Eagle River, and the CO for
Yeah, they don't have to read very far to find out, but that's fine. I mean, I'm not opposed to changing the title.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the title of the document, but maybe in the title of what's posted or anything that we have on our agenda, so people know what they're looking for clarity. This is just.
If it's just a question for me, if it's posted, is is there anything posted with it, or is it just the document itself? I mean, it says clearly within the very introduction that it's limited maintenance areas for both CO and PM10, so it says in the introduction that it's for both, but.
I mean, I don't have no objection to it. I don't think it's a requirement for it, but if you want to put it in there, that's fine with me. I mean, I have no objection.
Is there a way to put a note, just to clarify, note that says both CO and PM10?
I mean, I don't know that it's necessary either, and I think the title could get pretty long, because you're talking about Anchorage CO and Eagle River PM10, and everyone Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Yeah, so I just wanted to check on when the 30-day window would be.
Well, we can start today.
Okay.
So,
And then just a note to the committee that the air quality committee hasn't reviewed this yet, but was be scheduled to do so within that 30 days.
There's a question, did we monitor PM10 in Anchorage at all? Whereabouts are those monitors? Do they?
There's one real bad one on Tudor Road.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Hearing none, this is now open to the public. Are there any questions or comments on item 5B? Hearing none, now I'll ask the committee.
I would like to know for everyone, is that this did go through a very extensive interactive consultation process. It was because it's the first time we were doing a conformity determination through our limited maintenance plan. We wanted to make sure that we were setting the precedents correctly. And so Ms. Pelley, Matt Shustek did a great job really routing this through and making sure we got FHWA and FTA and EPA and all those guys did a really good review of this and worked with us to determine what would be the best way to lay out this document. Okay.
Move to approve for public comment?
Second.
Moved by Mr. King, second by Mr. Lindsay. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are done. Next up, item 5C, test administrative application number 11.
Okay, we just have a few major items, minor items there to be modified. So in table 5, you'll see in the CMAC category, some monies have been shifted from the Air Quality Public and Business Awareness Education Campaign down to the transit fleet expansion. If I remember correctly, I believe the Air Quality Public and Business Awareness Education Campaign still kind of has some money sitting in the bank left over from last year that they are able to continue using, so this isn't going to make them short. They're going to continue to be able to do what they need to do, just to help us with the transit fleet expansion part. And then in Table 7 Transit, we updated some of the numbers for the Alaska Railroad to reflect their actual FTA dollar amounts down there. So the administrative modifications are approved by the TAC. Our practice has been in the past to recommend approval to the policy committee, but the operating agreement shows that the admin mods are approved by the TAC. So you can either approve it today or you can forward on to the policy committee.
Any questions or comments? No?
Let's just make a comment, the additional funds we're going to use, the transit is going to be used to buy paratransit vehicles and probably a little bit for service, which we're allowing under the TIP, but majority of it's going for paratransit fleet, which we definitely need to replace. And I appreciate your support.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? It is now open for public comment. Are there any questions or comments on item 5C? Hearing none, then I will now ask the committee.
So moved.
Moved by Wilbur, seconded by Linda Mood. Are there any opposed? And are we?
Just presenting this information then to the policy committee.
So we're moving to
Mr. Wilbur.
approve. All right, any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Didn't come from me.
Item 5D is the AMATS Freight Advisory Committee appointment.
Oh, my God, not this guy. You gonna vouch?
I do have a comment. I noticed this. He didn't realize it was coming up for a vote like this, and I had the pleasure of telling my boss that his fate was in my hands today.
Sorry, Craig, you were gonna say.
I know, he's kidding.
It is there is a Port of Anchorage slot on the AMATS Freight Advisory Committee. And formerly Mr. Wilson, who was the port director, is filling that. And as you can see by Ms. Walsh's appearance here, Mr. Rebuffo is no longer with us here. So, we're at recommendation to the policy committee that they appoint him to the Freight Advisory Committee.
Any questions or comments from the committee? I'll vouch for it, I know. Are there any questions or comments from the public on item 5D, the Freight Advisory Committee appointment? Hearing none, the rest of us. Move to approve.
Second.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved.
You just can't get away from it.
I know, I was thinking the same thing.
I'll let him know. I'd be thrilled.
Oh, that's fun.
Tell him there was a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I know.
Tell them, try to convince everyone to vote 10.
So next up, item 5E. This is the AMATS PMP number 6.
So there are, AMATS PMP number 6 talks about the household employment forecast and all the stuff that we added into PMP number 6, and it includes language that talks about at the bottom of that red, it says the first report shall be prepared no later than June 1st, 2014. Well, as you're well aware, we are in the process of updating our modeling, getting our household travel survey information, and all this kind of stuff that goes into creating such a report. And we are certainly not, well, some of that stuff we haven't even started, just because we haven't got all those contracts online. So we are asking that first report be delayed for a year so we can get all that information gathered and present that next June if that is acceptable to folks.
And then as soon as the, I guess we'll get into it with an update on the schedule, but the socioeconomic recommendations would be coming to this body, not just reported on, but actually adopted, isn't it?
I believe that's the plan.
That's the intent. Okay.
Because I believe that's what you guys did the last time in the MTP update, was there was a resolution about
Right.
this came from Russ and John Green. And I would assume that you would want to do the same for the MTP update.
And it still falls, so every 4 years and at least 2 years prior to the required submission date of the MTP. Are we still falling within that?
Yeah, that's really tight.
Really tight.
And there may be some milestone reports that we could give, smaller reports on our progress toward this as we're developing the household travel surveys and maybe another sheet of ways rather than a full report into this.
Maybe it'd be a good time in context of this, request the extension would be to also give to the policy committee a list of the, I don't know, say boundaries or, what assumptions we're gonna put in and do for the MTP, like we did last time for the MTP update. We had the, whereas we will. all
That's the
boundaries
resolution.
and things,
Mhm.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's in here too, right? Or that's what you guys are talking about?
That's what we're talking about, but I don't know that it's specifically outlined as a resolution in this. This is more of a report
Right.
that you guys requested.
But
I-
part of what
and
we get the report and we get the status how we're gonna use it with NTP, so by throwing them together, it's not just a report, but you can also say, we want them to use this, and we need it, and therefore, we're gonna let it slide. So it kind of gives you a rationale for it's okay, in the time to use it, which is a thought.
I would say the plan is to do the same sort of resolution that we did last time with the MTP, so that everyone's on the same page.
When is that ever?
Well, that's part of the MTP process, so we expect by the fourth quarter this year is when we'll have the contractor on board for the MTP. Maybe first quarter of next year, but that would be when that would start bubbling up, bring that through like we did similar to last time.
Any other questions from the committee?
Just for clarity, the purpose of this action item here is just to ask for an extension of the submission of the socio-ed fund
Mhm.
data from 2014 to 2015,
Yep.
right? The conversation I think Cindy's got is important but not relevant to the action that requested staff. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And this is discussion again, not relevant to this, but I just had a question. So you're talking about bounds or the scope of the MTP, like what we're going to entertain as part of the MTP process, that's this resolution you're talking about? Like whether we're gonna go out for a needs list and some of these other things, I mean, is that what you're talking about?
If I remember correctly, the things that we had in the resolution talked about, so everyone's on the same page. We all agree that the kindergarten crossing project is in here. We all agree that, we're looking at these types of projects that are in here. These are the financials that we agree to, sort of thing. Just so we didn't have a lot of discussion like we had prior, that just took us down all these little different rabbit holes and things were off the table we could understand and everyone could agree. These were the set of assumptions that we were looking at going forward.
But it could be expanded to do those other kind of items we talked about.
Well, and that's,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I things like the financial plan, things that where we got down rabbit trails last time.
Right.
I think that would be good to have that discussion up front and then call for it.
We'll find other rabbit trails, but we'll try to, keep those to a minimum.
The other thing about having that resolution done sooner rather than later is if we know there's areas of problem already, the timing, if there's something that's gonna be able to be helpful with that and decisions, it might be good to get those kind of decisions done earlier rather than
Right,
later.
right.
It really helped last time.
Well, we ought to have those discussions before we let the RFP. So we start asking for things that are gonna be outside the boundaries, we're not gonna be asking for something that we don't really need to set the boundaries. So at least at a minimum level, we ought to have those conversations before we let it, because otherwise, we're gonna start asking for things that either aren't relevant or are not necessary. So maybe we can do that as a group. And anyway, just an idea, because I think if we get too far down that path and then we start telling everyone to do this piece of work, oh, don't do this and don't do that, don't do this, because the policy committee said don't do this and don't do that, then we spend a lot of time asking for somebody to do something, and then we're telling them not to do it. So that would not be good either. So it's a good discussion to have, but let's stick to this one here, I
Okay,
think.
one last thing before we move on. Is there typically a work session to discuss that? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That was prior to my time being here last time with the MTP, so I wasn't involved in the portion, so, okay.
Well, sorry, I monopolized you, but I thought we needed to talk about that. It's the closest thing on the agenda that seemed like it was gonna work.
Other business? All right. Any other questions or comments on this item from the committee? All right, it's now open to the public. Is there any questions or comments on this item from the public? Hearing none, the matter lies before the committee.
Move to approve the extension of the deadline of submission of the socioeconomic data to the technical committee until on or before June 1st, or June of 2015.
Second, we discussed.
Yes, I have a comment. I think as part of the original, I think it's difficult to meet every 4 years, though I think that's a good intent, but I still think we are going to meet at least 2 years prior to the required submission date of the MTP if we can get those two together.
Except that is actually May of 2016, isn't it? And so we are already
So that would
2
be-
years prior.
Right.
We're already behind.
Well, even June of 2014 was good.
But we'll have that.
I would miss that too.
May I offer a friendly amendment?
Sure.
That as soon as that data is available, or the recommendation of what to use is available, let it be brought to this body as soon as possible.
I would support that.
Do we still want to say at the very latest, June of 2014?
No later than.
No later than. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, but we'll wait until after your information.
All right, are there any opposed to the motion before us? Hearing none, we are so moved. I don't know if I've ever seen this many business ethics.
Nope, I haven't.
I know business. 5F, AMATS Public Transportation letter.
There was language that was included in safety living, and it was reinforced in map 21 about specifically having representation by providers of public transportation on MPO boards. The discussion that had occurred at several different locations, meaning at AMPO at the national level, at APA, NORC, et cetera, had to do with whether or not, or in what degree this applied to providers of public transportation. And in the case of AMATS, we had always believed that having the mayor on the policy committee, due to the fact that the Department of Public Transportation was one of his departments before him, that was taken care of, and we had agreement from FTA and FHWA that that was the case. Well, the new language that has come out in the latest national proposed rulemaking suggests that that would not be the case. If a mayor cannot serve both roles. And so the language clearly states that you would have to have a representation by the provider of public transportation on your board as well. However, in the NPRM, the National Proposed Rulemaking, there's an exemption that is allowed that says if your MPO was designated before December 19th, 1991, then you can self-certify that you are exempt from this requirement because you were constituted before that date, which we obviously were. AMATS came into being in 1976. So we are allowed to have that exemption as long as we self-certify that, or if we went through a certification process prior to October 1 of this year. We are not going to go through our certification process. We're not going to have it finished before October 1st of this year, so we would need to self-certify. So that's what this language does. That's what this letter is. The idea behind this letter is this is us self-certifying that we are exempt from that requirement due to the fact that we were created before December 19th, 1991.
Mr. Lindeman?
Further confuse things, has this been run through our organization yet?
This is the first I believe I've seen it. We just started running it.
We had a triennial review from FTA last year, and one of the major findings was exactly this. And their belief that the Alaska Railroad, for some reason or other, needed to be on the policy committee, which is something that I don't necessarily think that our organization really agrees with, but we've been trying to find a way out of it. And this may or may not work, but I don't know that we can support this until I run this through our grants folks and see if this is enough to do it. Would there be any problem if we just postpone this till the August meeting and give me time to find that out?
Our deadline is October 1, so
Well,
we have time. Absolutely.
Does it have to go through public review or anything, or does it just go from us to the policy committee?
This is a self-certification. We've never done anything like this before. It's a new exemption, so we're just kind of trying it out. When your certification came up, and I was informed that we would need to add members of the railroad, et cetera, to our policy committee, and FMATS would have to do the same thing, I discussed this with our FTA rep, and he said, That was not his understanding of the language that was in map 21 in Safety Lou, and that he would clarify it with the folks who were doing your certification. I don't know that he was actually doing the certification, the review, I mean, but he would clarify that with. So I've never seen the results of your training review, so.
And there still is not agreement.
Still language in there, so.
Yeah.
My understanding was it was not an issue. Mr. Conrad was going to clarify it. But this language right here, based on what's in the NPRM, allows us to certify that we are exempt from that requirement.
Well, I just like an opportunity to try to close the loop on our end and make it up a good way.
Yeah, if it's good for Guzman, it'll be good for me.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
If we, has staff taken a look at the planning, the notice of proposed rulemaking on planning, and is there any proposal to make comments on it during this, about these kinds of clarifications and things like that? We have an opportunity.
Yeah.
I know the state's looking at it and.
I started wading through it.
Yes, okay, and so if there's any, and maybe this would be something for, if it's not, I mean, this part works for an AMATS, and yet if there's any other clarifications that you might recommend, there's a chance to make them.
I would say, public comment, I move to.
Well, I'm gonna say, if you're public, any other questions or comments from the committee at this time?
Yeah, so my understanding is that this is a matter of timing, the necessity of doing this now, versus a matter of not wanting the voice of public transportation on the policy committee. But why would we not want that?
Well, right now, again, when map 21 came out and it clarified needing the provider of public transportation on the policy committee, many MPOs said, well, we have the mayor, and the mayor right now, in our case, has the public transportation department as one of their reports. So public transportation, public works, community development, et cetera, can all be considered to be represented on our policy committee because they are all departments that the mayor is in charge of and controls and et cetera. And those are all the things I'm sure that bubbles through his head as he tries to make a determination on something. He knows all those departments are things that he has to be taking stock of while he's making a decision. And the other MPOs around the country, and ourselves included, kind of thought it would be a little strange for an executive appointee to be sitting next to the person who appointed him and to vote differently than he did. And worried about if that was their last vote. As the director of the department, in case it was a controversial decision. And so the idea is, how free would they feel to disagree with their boss? I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that was a consideration that came up in the discussion at the AMPO and other places. And so the idea was, and I thought it was agreed to. I mean, FDA came out and said, oh, we agree. If you have a mayor who has those departments, then this requirement is satisfied. So it was a little surprising to see this rulemaking come out and say, oh, no, it doesn't satisfy that. That would not be what you should consider, and you will need to have a separate person on there unless you're accredited for 91. So, I mean, the language is clearly in the rulemaking that says if you're accredited for 91, you're exempt from it. So they must have done that for a reason.
If you think about it, if you have a multi-jurisdictional area, has lots of mayors or something, if you have your regional transportation head guy, yeah, because he would want somebody on there because he's looking at the whole big picture where all the mayors are worried about their little piece of pie. And that makes perfect sense, but in where we are, it's.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you for the
Yeah,
illustration.
and if you had several different public transportation providers in an entity, you can't really have a mayor saying, I'm representing those. In our case, we have, railroad and public transit, and they're represented through that, and we have them through the TAC here. I mean, the original language talked about they must be represented on your MPO, not specifically the MPO board. So clearly we have the railroad here on our MPO. This language clear.
We're now going to open it to public comment. Are there any questions or comments on item 5F? Hearing none, then item 5 is with us.
I'd like to move this agenda item be moved to the agenda next month, so give us time to make sure.
I'll second that.
Moved by Mr. Oliver, second by Mr. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved. This is everything that's moved.
Now, item 5G, the Campbell Street redevelopment project.
Just had a work session on the model results, and during the discussion at that work session, talked about what's going to be the resolution of the results and where we go from here and all that sort of stuff. And I think if I can capture that, my thought was, what we heard was, we would like this project to be considered as you update your MTP to roll it in to look at that kind of the holistic sense. And I think that's what we have in the memo here. It talks about that. The last sentence in the first paragraph says, staff has reviewed this request and recommends that this proposal be considered in the context of its regional impacts as part of the next update to the AMATS MTP. So this is staff's proposal, staff's recommendation, what we should do with the project. We've been before us a number of times.
Mr. Oliver, sorry, I was
No, it's
underlining.
okay. Question for, I think for some gentlemen that are working on this in the audience. Does this get you what you need, or is this not entirely what you need?
I'm Bob Kniefel with Kittleson Associates, and we're the consultant on the study of that. I guess we had asked, I sent out an email to the two of you, that just asking that we do two things. One was, as Craig mentioned, that the report be included in any consideration for the NTP and the PIP updates. And secondly, that this completes the requirements of the study itself that was included in the NTP originally. So that was the only thing we'd want to add to that.
So, kind of, sort of, mostly, but not quite.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? I'm not sure what we're supposed to do right now.
Accept the recommendation.
Are we in that part of the MTP update where we're considering projects?
No.
I don't even have an RFP out yet.
That's what I'm looking at, the cart before the horse. We can agree to bring it in as part of the MTP and then MTP content would be
Well, what would the schedule be, Greg?
Well, the RFP, we expect to have out in the next, I don't know, 2 to 3 weeks, and hopefully relatively soon to get it on the, to get it through purchasing and all that sort of stuff and get it through the approval process. Again, I would assume that near the end of the year is when we'll have a contractor on board, and then kind of similar to what we're saying with this resolution that goes in, this would be another project that we would say, it's not in the MTP right now as it's currently written. When you're looking at that, consider this as a project to be included in that. And the time
Schedule for the MTP then?
has to be approved by June of
May 25th, 2016.
May of 2016. So,
So we score it then, as part of the MTP.
Well, one of the things that was talked about at the work session was the impacts that this has on the other north-south facilities. Because they recognize that there is some impacts to Boniface and to others. And so having the ability to look at timing, if you were to do this, say, 10 years before you have the connection of the Glen and the Seward Highway, what does it do to the system? And to be able to look at it kind of from a holistic standpoint as opposed to just focused only on the Gamble Street corridor. And that's what we had discussed also with the work session.
I guess the second piece, I guess, of what Bob brought up was, part of it was considering this in the next MTP. The second part was whether or not that study met the requirements of whatever, I was at item 540, whatever it is. Of the
576.
Is it 576? The Fairview pedestrian safety study. I guess I had personally, when I was looking at that, I had some questions, because I didn't know, to me, I haven't read what the scope of that's supposed to be, but that says it's a Fairview pedestrian safety study, and I don't know that I've seen anything in depth specifically looking at all of Fairview and the pedestrian safety. I know that you discussed some of the crashes along the Gamble corridor and everything, but I know typically when you do a ped safety study, there's a very in-depth analysis of some of those intersections, crash patterns, and everything else along this. And I don't know if I feel comfortable saying that this meets the intent of that project, so that gets removed from the MTP, because that may still be necessary even if this project is considered. This is only one corridor within Fairview. I mean, there's still several other major corridors in the area, so.
James has something.
I can clarify a little
Okay.
bit of that for you. I have the MTP here.
Yeah.
It's project number 576.
Yeah.
Project name Fairview Pedestrian Safety Study. And the project purpose and description as stated in the MTP says investigate pedestrian safety improvement needs within the Ingram-Gamble Streets couplet corridor.
Okay, so
And
it's
that's
just,
exactly how it's worded.
so it's both Ingram and Gamble.
Right.
Is there any work done on it?
Have some questions?
Yeah, Mr. Weber?
So, Bob, on the second request, that would meet the intent of what's in the MTP for the pedestrian study? Was that what you were looking for? Is that based on what James just read for that scope of work on the pedestrian on Gamble and Ingram? Do you think the work that you guys have done, obviously I think it did a good job on Gamble, did it did the same level of analysis on Ingram? I don't know because we didn't focus on it during the work session.
Right. The focus of the way the funding came through was to look at the Gamble corridor itself.
Okay.
Again, the community received funding from the state, and it was focused on the Gamble side of that, so that's what we did.
Okay.
We did not look at the Ingrid corridor, no.
Okay, no problem.
All right, any other questions or comments from the committee at this time? I will now open to public comments. Are there any questions or comments from the public on this item?
Maybe, I guess, if I can be public, I guess, I don't know. How that works out in that. I guess the intent there is at least accept the study that was done for Gamble Street and maybe it doesn't meet the requirement of, as the language that James quoted out of the MTP, but typically, you know, the studies are accepted. Again, you're not approving the study, you're not saying the recommendations have to happen, but at least accept the fact that the study was completed in that. And again, we're not asking for approval to be put into the MTP, we're saying it should be considered as a project to look at for the MTP and then the following TIP update.
Any other questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, then on our last committee.
Move to approve staff's staff's recommendation to consider the proposal to reduce for the Gamble Street redevelopment project, which would reduce travel lanes, underground utilities, provide snow storage and widen the sidewalks, to consider it in the context, well, basically what's this, of its regional impacts as part of the next update to the AMATS MTP.
Moved by Ms. Wade, seconded by Mr. Lemieux. Are there any opposed to the motion? Hearing none, we are so moved.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a second motion. I would move that the committee, we do accept the report that was created because I do think AMATS could benefit from it. However, we don't think that we need in the motion to accept the findings or its completeness I do think it addresses part of the study recommendations, and we ought to benefit from the work that's been done. And as to complete the rest of it, looking at English Street, that would meet the intent of the plan, and we should use the benefit of the study that was done in the public process in Fairview that just unfortunately dealt with Gamble Street. So I think we should accept the study, but not full concurrence of the recommendations.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Wilbur, seconded by Ms. Howe. Are there any opposed to Mr. Wilbur's motion?
Yes, actually, I would oppose it as a technical committee member because as a technical committee member, neither I nor my staff have gone through an exhaustive evaluation of this to accept its, it has not been presented as an AMATS product, it has not been asked to be an AMATS product, except for acceptance into the MTP and the TIP. I think part of what has been resolved is that if the push to get this done sooner than later was to influence a paving project that DOT has, that opportunity is coming on. And so I am not comfortable even accepting the report. Recognizing it would be fine, recognizing that it is a tool and a resource as for consideration as we move forward as AMATS moves forward to developing a model in MPP. I certainly support that, but no, I don't even accept it. I wouldn't recommend that we accept it as a body.
So since we have opposition, we can go to a vote. Mr. DeSantis, are you either for accepting the report but not the findings, or against accepting?
I would vote against.
Ms. Martin?
I vote against.
I vote for.
Yes.
Yes.
Against.
Against?
Ms. Wilbur?
I'll go for it.
Ms. Walsh? For. Mr. Hanson?
Actually, technically, Paul.
I'm not technically here, so.
Well, you
I've
did come in later.
Just barely part, so
You've been here for this whole item.
not quite.
Were you not here, or are you gonna abstain from the vote?
Yeah, I think I prefer to abstain, since I
Well-
wasn't here for the whole thing.
I'm gonna be the comes through tie. How does that work? I know. Well,
Your tie fits.
There's only 10 of us without him.
yeah, I know. I mean, right now there's 5-4 and there's 4 against, so I am the tiebreaker. If there is a tie. I mean, that's fine, but.
Why you can abstain?
I'm against. So it's 5 and 5. So, are there any other business items? There's something else in this.
One information item.
That's an informational item, okay. So are there any other business items at this time? New business?
Is it business we're talking about?
Is there anything that you
Oh,
know?
yeah, the resolution, and between the resolution and you just mentioned that the RFP is getting ready to go out in 2 or 3 weeks. And then we were reading comments, but it would be nice to have this resolution at least crafted or possibly do the policy committee before the RFP went out. Is that what you said, Lance?
Yeah, what I was looking for was maybe this committee getting together, as Stephanie mentioned, we could kind of do a work session and think about, if we can, the schedule, the content of what we need to include in this update based on the new planning, and then maybe help the staff before they get the RFP out on the street, maybe set some boundaries on what we should or shouldn't be looking at in the scope, and that way when they let it out on the street, we're asking the right questions, and then we're not giving them an open book, and then come back to the policy committee and they say, this is the financial plan, you don't need to look at it. These are the projects you're gonna include, don't consider anything else. I think if the staff had some guidance, so before they put the RFP, that was the, and whether it's a business item, I haven't thought about that, but
Well,
it's just the.
I was like, as a business, that we direct staff to get us put us a work session before they put the RFP out, but that's definitely something.
I was just putting it out there as an idea, and I don't know how the rest of the committee thinks about, maybe giving the staff some guidance.
I'm elevating it to a business item, to try to discuss.
Then you would need a motion to do that.
I move that we determine when a work session would be best to begin discussions on the resolution in relation to the RFP.
I'll second that.
Moved by Ms. Allen, seconded by Mr. Wilbur. Are there any opposed to that? Hearing none, we are so moved. Please let the record show that Ms. Walsh left at 3:28 p.m.
Mr. Hanson showed up.
Mr. Hanson showed up.
Greetings.
3:15-ish time. All right.
Thank you, Sam.
Cindy?
So, this was a discussion, I mean, if we need to have a resolution, if we need to put boundaries, the timing of when we do that, in relation to the RFP is, the RFP come out, we need to do that the next couple of weeks. I mean, that's how I interpret this, am I incorrect?
Well, I believe previously, the resolution that we had obviously came out long after a contract was let and we had a contractor on board. And Gary, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you work with us to help create the resolution?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm Gary Capsion with Kittleson and Associates.
So-
I'm a consultant project manager for the 2035.
That's the way it was previously. That doesn't mean that was the right way. That's what we did last time.
Just asking questions.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of along those lines, though, in terms of timing, just in terms of the subject that you have as an informational item, the household travel survey in your schedule, that I think we were supposed to be getting a monthly updates on. But it shows that it was supposed to, scheduled to be completed by now, and it's not gonna happen until the fall. And so there's a ripple effect. And so, my concern just in general, and to echo what Cindy's talking about, is that, if it is doubtful, or if there is a chance that we would not be able to achieve everything that needs to be done by May of 2016, that we need a plan B. And that such a resolution would be able to identify if indeed we need one. But right now, until this is updated and we can see what all of the flow is for everything, I think that we are very much at risk. If we're already, the other one had to do with just letting the RFP for the travel, for the MTP update. I mean, we're already 6 months behind. And so, what I would ask is that we have a work session that addresses this holistically, and if we need a plan B for what might be, I don't know what we would call it, Lance, an interim or another, like a 2-year update or something that would get us through to allow a full, I mean, it's been a long time since we've done a full model development. How many years? A long time. And so to make sure that we're not pushing things too fast, that it might jeopardize its
We're gonna manage expectations.
Yes, and just the reality of it now too is that we have accomplished some projects. We have actually gotten a state, some state money that we hadn't anticipated this soon. I mean, the physical constraints, taking a look at it as an interim step to see where we are in implementing AMATS and all of our new tools. But I don't know, so what was your motion, just to have
To discuss this,
to have a work session?
and when we should have a work session, and the timing of the RFP. We need to have a work session, but when do we want to have a work session, and what do we want to have the work session on?
So Craig, what is
It's a good
your-
question.
Yeah.
Currently, based on your plan right now, maybe Vivian or Jason or whoever's working on the draft RFP for the MTP, what's their target date for really putting it together to send to purchasing? Is it imminent, or is it in a month or so? So just to give us a sense of time of how urgency we need to get together to help you do that, so
Well,
if we
through
did.
through the chair, we do not have, we don't have an internal review draft yet.
Okay.
The goal with this RFP is to have a complete RFP so that we don't have to go back out and do major revisions, major amendments. Just enough said, we don't want to do that
Sure,
with
okay.
this RFP.
Next 30 days. would probably be
Right. So we want to have an internal review first, and then probably, do you want to do the work session before the agency review draft?
I would suggest
And
that.
may I just explain something too? This schedule may be doable, actually. Everything hinges on the model update, which of course hinges on the survey, right? We're about 5 to 6 months pushed out because of unavoidable circumstances, and I think Craig was going to address this. But we're through the procurement process. And so basically, we have, instead of 15 months from the time you would do the model execution and developing future projections and the fiscal constraints and get to a public review draft, we would have 9 months. So that's the picture. If that causes you concern, and depending on what the consultants are able to do too, I mean, they might be able to move faster, or they might be able to move, and we have just got these consultants on board. I don't think we've really been able to have these conversations yet. And it's not a coincidence that all of these contracts are getting done at the same time. They've all gone through the same internal procurement process that has the same logic.
Just for my own meditation, yeah, because I wasn't here the last time we did this. Did we, as a technical advisory committee, have input on that previous RFP prior to the development of the RFP for the NTP?
Not as a committee.
Not as a committee. Okay. So it wasn't until after we already had the consultant on board that really the resolution came about to the assumptions of what we were moving forward with. I guess then my question posed to the committee, do we feel as though that irked, or are we recommending changes to that process? Because I think I'm just spitballing here, but if we try to have a work session to discuss this RFP, and that changes the RFP, and that pushes the RFP out even further.
I'm not sure if it's necessarily the RFP, but it's in the context of the RFP, is that we're looking at a schedule, and we're looking at what could happen if something slips, or what do we cut out? Can we cut out something? What do we try to minimize? What decisions do we make, like, let's say we don't do a call for nominations, we use the TIP nominations, or we do different things that are timing wise, that could be elements that would be in the RFP or not. It's hard to know until you really look at all the big picture, what you're trying to accomplish in the amount of time you're trying to accomplish it, and be able to say, it's really not realistic to try to get all of this done. But if they write an RFP to do all that, that's what the consultant's job is to do, is to fulfill the RFP. So in this particular instance, I'm wondering if it might be prudent to have that kind of discussion. Not saying that they're not doing a good job with the RFP, but to say, or look at the RFP specifically, but to look at the big picture and see where we are timing-wise, and what we think we can get done or not, and if there's anything we can accelerate or do without the next time, or make an interim, or whatever. I'm not trying to do their job, I'm just trying to provide guidance or some input, and to truly understand all the delays and what the interconnectivity is going on at this point. Because we haven't seen enough data sets for a while.
Would a work session on this be?
Yeah, I'm just saying, I just want a discussion of the whole thing, and not to put it off till another month for a meeting about it. Did that make sense?
Yes, I guess as a business item, do we want to have a motion for a work session, and, I mean, as a business item, I understand we have to have.
She made it,
Yeah.
I seconded it, she's got to vote on it, let him set it up.
No, I thought we voted and seconded on actually having the discussion at this time.
Yes.
We didn't make a motion of actual.
I think it was much flexibility.
I think I'm following along.
All right, sorry about that, Madam Chair.
So, that was a modification of the agenda. Having,
All right.
Mary.
It was a discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, I am very concerned about our ability to meet this deadline, having done what I will be the first to say that we did the best we could with the time and the tools we had last time. I would not recommend subjecting ourselves to that again if we can help it. And so, and the other thing, I think, just stepping back is that, in terms of what is useful to this committee, I mean, I think everybody agrees it would be very useful to have the new tools and to really start looking at our network and how things have changed. The household travel survey could really change some of those algorithms on trip attraction rates and everything else that might start showing different types of projections. We already know too that there are areas in the model where it doesn't work, where actually we have more traffic today than we thought we would, like on Elmore than we would have in 2035. So, in Muldoon, these developments that we hadn't anticipated at the time. So having the tool and being able to use that is very, very useful. Must we have that in order to do an interim or another update to our NTP? The things that have changed probably most right now in terms of the network, in terms of what's since our last one is probably the fiscal reality that we assumed. And the beauty of it is that based on the methodology that Lance had originally developed, that thing has been put on steroids and everything is linked, and those assumptions can readily be updated and looked at and played with, because I think that is where, given where we are on the federal highway side, given the refocus on the national highway system, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and I'm not sure to push everything for that. Even if we had a one-year extension from 16 to 17, it's tough. And so and maybe what I would say, okay, do we have to close out or take action on there?
We did that, we have to.
Yeah, but I asked the committee, would it be useful to have another work session to get really caught up and looking at some of these things, or if there are people that are, to understand, and because we do have new members as well, too. But to understand the interrelationships of this and see where do we most need to focus, because you have a limited staff and limited money and time, and what can we do best? And I would certainly hate to hold up, because we did, the last time we started the NTP update, we lost about 1.5 years because of some of the decisions that needed to be made about the Kindergarten crossing. And once that decision was made, we had a document move forward. We had I don't know, was it 9 months, 18 months, I don't know. It seemed very short. And if there is a way to maybe revisit the existing plan to see where it needs to be validated, whatever, to keep our quality conformity and to keep our ability in place to receive federal funds, maybe we need to look at a smaller, I don't know, I just throw that out. I may be speaking heresy, but I do remember, it wasn't that long ago, it's like pulling out old scabs, to talk about the last NTP update. But we ended up with a very, very good product, I thought. And maybe we can just tweak that.
We have a work session.
I remember the same discussion last time, as ways we were doing another interim, that's my word, interim NTP. Next time we're going to go on a full-blown one, and now we're in the same position. I agree we have to, approach this realistically, and I agree wholeheartedly. I guess next time we'll do the real one. With all the tools that we need to do it right. It's a little frustrating sometimes to be in a position where.
There's options.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a May 16 deadline. We could still do a complete one. We just can't do it by the 2016.
Yeah.
We would need probably a year extension from FHWA. So if we got the extension, and they would allow us to continue with our projects and our conformity, we could meet the intent of doing a full updated plan, but it would be really difficult unless Vivian, making all, show the stars are in alignment, we can pull it off in this scheduled time. So I just think the point for the whole thing is just having the technical committee involved in this rather than being told that we're not gonna meet a date and have us help us along. And so that was, so anything we can help the staff, whether we're narrowing or guiding or helping ask for a different date. And just, I think we don't wanna be repeating history because it was painful. And we know enough ahead that we don't need to do that. So-
And if we're already 6 months behind potentially meeting this May 25th date, we're already,
Yeah.
I mean, potentially, recognizing there's some plus built in. But it's the interconnectivity, and we don't know what kind of, I think that we just need to have this discussion in a work session to compare, just like David said.
Madam Chair, the horizon year is important. We're thinking about doing an amendment or an interim MTP. We would want it to be 20 years from the
Adopted date.
from the adopted date.
Mhm.
And so we don't want to get into using new data or anything. It has to be based on the most current assumptions. So we would want to look at the economic assumptions and look at the projections. But we don't want to get into a major update with looking at new data. So my point is, if we want to do an interim MTP, if you decide that you would like to do that, it should be done by the middle of 2015. Right, so you want to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And we can do that, if that's what you decide. I think Mr. Wilbur has another good point too, that, we did the last one in 18 months, 17 months, from start to finish. And that's about what this would be. That's about what this would be if we started in January. And they did a miracle. They did a miracle.
So that, I'm just a question for, so the planning assumptions, the updated planning assumptions comes from the planning regulations, not conformity, correct? It's conformity doesn't drive that anymore.
Right, that's in the planning regulations.
Planning regulations,
Yes,
okay.
and we can do an interim MTP. We did it in 2003, when we were working on the 2005, the 2025 LRTP at the time, and realized that it wasn't going to happen. And so they did a preemptive interim MTP.
I just wanted to make sure that wasn't, because I know that it doesn't matter now from a air quality modeling standpoint about really just planning assumptions, because that's out the window. So this is a separate requirement that just is required for FHWA for general planning purposes,
Yes.
not really unrelated to air quality.
Yes.
Okay.
But through the chair, FHWA does have a website that says where you can go to see who else is in nonconformity, and absolutely nobody is in nonconformity labs. So I would hate for Anchorage to be up there, the only.
Well, we were for a year the last time.
Yeah, so it's just amazing.
I move that staff set up a work session before the next policy committee meeting, just have to discuss everything.
For the next policy or next technical?
That's open for discussion.
I would say the policy committee meeting is 2 weeks from today.
I would second that. I think we need to do this as soon as possible so we can get the parameters of what we're dealing with here. We need to get it on schedule and on track.
So moved by Ms. Howe, seconded by Mr. Weaver. Are there any opposed? Everybody have time. Okay. Well, hearing no opposition, hopefully we can have a work session scheduled sooner rather than later to discuss some of these findings, as I think there really is a lot to consider. Okay. Now we're on to the informational reports.
Just a quick status of the RFPs that we have out or getting out, et cetera. Also the contracts we have. The travel survey has been awarded to RSG. I don't know if anyone was fortunate enough to receive the postcard that asks you to do the pilot survey. There are actually 2 people in this building that were. I received one just as a sample, but So this is again for the pilot survey. The main survey will be done in the fall. So they're moving right along. They're looking to have a meeting with AMATS and other key stakeholders July 31st. So we'll let you know as we get closer to that. The ITS architecture, the contract is at purchasing, awaiting the meeting manager's signature, and then it'll be ready to roll. The CMP, as you can see, is notice award to Cambridge Systematics, ready for a kickoff meeting. Same kind of thing with the travel demand model update. That was given to RSG, and we'll look into a kickoff meeting soon. The freight mobility study and the MTP both are finishing up the RFP to, the freight mobility says finalizing the TORA, and then the MTP, we've had some discussion about what's happening with that. There are, those are the projects that we're working on that have outside contractors. We finished the OS and HP through the assembly. It was approved at the assembly, so that one we're working on, waiting to get the amendments from the clerk's office. Have you gotten those yet? So we're still waiting to get the amendments from the clerk's office, and as when we get that, we can create a published document, so we'll have a new OS and HP. And the public involvement plan, we're still working that through the staff process and the draft finalized. I think you're up to date on projects, unless I'm missing one. No more? Okay. There you have it.
Any questions? On this? Oh, no, that's fine. So yes, are there any other comments? I guess, were there any questions or comments on this informational item? No? Okay, so yes.
So
Any comments?
Craig, at our August meeting, since your second quarter report is almost up for the UPWP, could you give us a status on all the tasks, including, obviously we got on the contract one, but some of the other ones, we know we got a couple, I think the UPWP had a couple staff members who wanted to hire, obviously Joni's on board, we got another one, but if we're gonna make any adjustments or changes, we need to know soon so we can reallocate the unified planning work program funds. And I can help you do that if so needed.
No, I will get the financial report probably in the next 2 weeks, sometime in the next 2 weeks, so I'll be able to give an update on the status of all those.
Yeah, just an information report,
Mhm.
great, thank you. Thanks, Ed.
And then also for the update, the public participation plan wasn't on your list, but I understand it's being done in-house, and so just to include it in the next update.
Right, that's why I said this list is all the ones that we have contracts or are planning on getting contracts. Both the OS and HP and the public involved plan were being done in-house by staff. Because we're doing the Air Web Trails plan as well in staff. So that's another one that we're working on that we're getting fired back up again.
Any other committee comments? Hearing none, our next scheduled AMATS meetings, the policy committee will meet 2 weeks from today on July 24th, and we will meet next month, August 4th.